This presentation is about the courage to be a constructivist in a classroom. It is written by Martin G. Brooks and Jacqueline Grennan Brooks. Martin Brooks is an executive director of the Tri-State Consortium in the states of New York, Connecticut, and New Jersey. Jacqueline Grennan Brooks is a professor of teaching leadership at Hofstra University in New York. What is constructivism? Constructivism is based around the idea of pragmatism, an educational approach based on the teachings of John Dewey, who believed that education should be grounded in the real world and the actual experiences of the child, which means that the classroom should be student-centered and that students learn by experience, hands-on activities, experimenting, and collaborating with each other. Constructivism and testing. Some schools reduce the curriculum only to what is covered on tests, and this constriction limits student learning. Also, requiring all students to take the same courses and pass the same test may please all political legislators and state-level educational policymakers, but it contravenes with what years of research tell us about how students learn. Teaching in ways to nurture students' quest to resolve conflict and conquer academic challenges fosters creative problem solving that most states seek. However, classroom practices designed to prepare students for tests today do not foster deep learning that students apply to new situations. Instead, these practices train students to mimic learning on tests. Constructivism in the classroom. Learners learn in different ways. Learners control the way they learn. As teachers, we have great control over what we teach, but we have almost no control about what students learn. So, when students want to know more about an idea, a topic, or an entire discipline, they put more effort into investigation and outside of the classroom research. We need to nurture this behavior in our students. Some of those ways include to seek and value students' points of view, to structure lessons to challenge students' positions, find relevance in the things we teach in class, and teach about the big ideas, not small pieces. Also, assessing students in the classroom, learning in the context of daily classroom investigation, not as separate events. Constructing meaning basically means that as teachers we must challenge students' thinking and value their points of view. As we ask questions in the classroom, we must take in consideration the students' points of view. However, we must also challenge the students to further explain their position. Critique. Constructivism is highly criticized. One critique of constructivism is that it's overly permissive. This critique suggests that constructivist teachers often abandon their curriculums to pursue the wills of their students. Another critique is that constructivism lacks rigor. Teachers cast aside information, facts, and basic skills embedded in the curriculum and necessary to pass high-stakes tests. However, a state and local curriculums address what students learn. Constructivism, as an approach to education, addresses how students learn. The constructivist teacher, in mediating with the students' learning, blends the what with the how. Stakes accountability. Instructional practices designed to help students construct meaning are being crowded out of the curriculum by practices designed to prepare students to score well on state assignments. Some states identified higher order thinking as a goal of reform and promoted constructivist teaching practices to achieve this goal. However, policymakers dropped this goal because it was deemed too difficult to assess and quantify. However, rich evidence relating to higher order thinking is available daily in classrooms, but is not necessarily translatable to paper and pencil assessments. Schools operating in high-stakes accountability systems typically move attention away from principles of learning, student-centered curriculum, and constructivist teaching practices. They focus instead on obtaining higher test scores, despite research showing that higher test scores are not necessarily indicative of increased learning. The future of constructivism lies on us. We must use students' daily work, points of view, supposition, projects, and demonstrations to assess what they know and what they don't know, and use these assessments to guide teaching. Also, we must initiate discussions among administrators, teachers, parents, school boards, and students about the relationship among state standards and the state's assessments and our district's mission. The students also must be permitted the freedom to think, to question, to reflect, and to interact with ideas, objects, and others. In other words, to construct meaning. In school, being wrong always carried the negative consequences for students. Sadly, in this climate of increasing accountability, being wrong carries even more severe consequences.